welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than no.
Yeah, no would be sad and negative.
Or actually, I should have said nah. That's the true antonym.
Or nah.
No. No.
Of course, you're listening to the Crash Chords podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm John.
And I'm Steve.
I'm going to get right into our album this week. I don't really have anything to talk about. Well, actually, that's not true. I'll take a step back. I know, how surprising.
He's already rescinding his previous statement.
That's right.
I don't think I've promoted our May guest yet, who's coming up, and it's a big one, so I would like to. We are finally getting the proprietor and owner of the Way Station, Andy Heidel, on the podcast. He's coming at the end of May, and I'm very excited to have him on. He's a big music fan. He also has one of the premier local music venues in Brooklyn. The Way Station features tons of music.
And what is the significance, I guess, as far as our clientele are concerned, of the Way Station?
Well, I mean, my connection with Andy is I met him when I became a regular at the bar. Of course, the Wasties have been on the podcast in many incarnations, both as a band and as individuals, and he pretty much sort of is responsible for the start of the Wasties. Circadian Clock have played at the Way Station as well. Me and Steve got to see them there.
How about the Wasties? I know, but the connection has to be apparent.
We cannot forget Joe
For all
Rude.
of the non-wasty people who listen.
Right.
Don't forget Joe Rude.
Joe Rude also I met through Nerdioki at the Way Station as well. There are actually a lot of connections to the Way Station. We have a guest coming up in July that I met through a band at the Way Station. So I want to bring him on.
They're a hub of sorts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to bring him on, A, because he's a good friend of mine and he's got really great taste in music, but B, I want to understand from his perspective. He opened this bar to be a nerd bar and a haven for nerds. That's why it's got a TARDIS in it. It's why it's got steampunk weapons on the wall. But it's also become a music venue, and a really good music venue at that. So I'm curious where the transition was. Why he decided to go in that direction.
When Westworld was shown, most likely, because that was one of the most eye-bleeding things I've ever been a part of.
That, of course, is Westworld, based on a Michael Crichton book.
I'm just going to theorize that the turning point happened when he realized that music makes money.
Well, actually,
that probably doesn't hurt.
He doesn't charge at the door,
Yeah.
so...
No, occasionally they do, don't they?
No.
Never. Hey, they've never had cover, huh?
No cover charge. It's always tip the band.
But more people, cause music, more drinking.
Obviously, but that's why he doesn't charge a cover, because people walk away from a cover. But if you find out that it's
also because of the orientation of the bar, I mean, there's not like that dedicated back area where people are just going to stay and watch. Instead, there's a lot more free, sort of a free floor back and forth between that and the bar. So people might like hang out right by the bar, continuously get drinks, while they can still enjoy the band.
There's also another connection I forgot to mention. Of course, I work for Wasabasco. I was introduced to Doc Wasabasco by Andy. They're old friends. And guests like Keita St. Cyr and Hazel Honeysuckle would have never been possible without my connection to the Way Station as well. So
basically, the Way Station has made this show.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, and in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Why don't you just come out and say it, man?
Well, it's not you guys, obviously.
Well.
Okay, that hurt. That hurt a little bit.
A little bit.
Anyway, so that's our May guest.
I produce it.
Keep that stowed in the back of your mind for later this month. This week is my album choice, and I'm actually pretty close to this band. They are one of the seminal bands for my musical development, especially in the 90s. There were a lot of 90s bands I've listened to, some who have stayed kind of alt-rock, some who have evolved, changed. But this is a band that's kind of always tried to reinvent themselves a little bit, but have a solid through line. And it's the band Blur. Now, Blur has such strong ties to me because, of course, I discovered them, like most people did, in 1997 when their self-titled record broke with their first single, Song 2. Now, if you don't know it by the title, you will know it by the chorus, which is simply, a woohoo!
I know it now. Yeah. Look at that. I didn't know it before when you referenced it, but now I do.
Everybody recognizes that song by its catchy hook, but I also believe Song 2 to be one of my favorite songs of all time, which is a big statement, especially since there are a lot of bands we've reviewed and talked about. But there are a few reasons why. A, it's concise. It's only about 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. It doesn't overstay its welcome as far as a single and a pop track goes. B, the hook is catchy as hell. Everyone remembers that chorus. Whether you know the name of the song or even the band, when I mentioned what I mentioned before, everybody immediately recognizes that song if they've heard it.
Plus, I really enjoy the lyrics.
The lyrics are great, a little trippy, a little off the wall, but really enjoyable.
Exactly.
Woohoo does speak to me on a very, very fundamental, almost existential level.
Of course it does.
Well, when you're all singing it together, especially that longer one, the woo-hoo. I mean, that just, it touches upon a place deep down inside me.
A very special place, no doubt.
Yes.
It also does interesting things with the guitar and drum and bass work, but without being overly complicated. We talk a lot about songs that can do simple work, but still make something with it. It's not bad because it's simple, but the simple actually adds a dynamic to it.
It's a talent. Again, exercise in brevity, that kind of thing. You come up with something simple that everyone can just relate to in a sense. I believe there's a definite talent behind that can't be overlooked.
And this also, one of the final reasons it's probably one of my favorite songs, it's one of the earliest anthemic songs. It sounded anthemic in a time where not every band put out an anthemic song. It was just very catchy, very engrossing, and again, if you felt it got a little repetitive, it barely stuck around long enough for you to even think that. So, of course, after hearing that song, they stuck with me, and I went back into their discography, got into a ton of their work. They actually originated in England. They formed in 1988, though their first album didn't actually come out till 1991. They've, of course, had 8 albums. This newest record that we're reviewing today being the 8th. They had a break between 2003 and 2008, but all of the band members are the same. Of course, those band members are Damon Albarn, who we reviewed before. He had a solo record that we covered and have mentioned at length about his production work with the Gorillaz. Also, Graham Coxon, Alex James, and David Rowntree. I really have identified with Blur strongly because, I mean, Steve knows at nauseam, I go back to the 90s stuff. But that self-titled album really resonated with me because there was something about the angst that wasn't whiny. It was presented in a way that was very relatable.
It wasn't overbearing.
Right.
Which is the big problem with angst.
Yes. But this was an angst that was relatable and understandable, especially in the 90s for myself, going through high school. They've, of course, had many influences as they go. They kind of started in shoegaze kind of territory, but they moved more towards indie when they hit the States, and they've kind of stuck there, but still adding different flavors of hip-hop and other things, all different kinds of genres, and meld them, which, of course, is also seen in Albarn's work with the Gorillaz, who primarily focus around kind of a very hip-hop focus, though they branch out there, too. It's also important to state that their last album came out 12 years ago, 2003. So the new album, which we are reviewing today, The Magic Whip, is 12 years in the making. I mean, they broke up in 2003 and got back together in 2008, so you could surmise that maybe they've been working on this since 2008, which is a long time to be working on a single album.
Well, maybe. A lot of times there's a certifiable hiatus in there. They are allotted vacations.
But I was excited about this album from the minute I heard the single because it reminded me of what I loved about Blur, about Damon Albarn specifically as an artist, and considering how much I loved that solo record, which we all were quite fond of, I was very excited to get into this record.
That was back in episode 109. Go back, check it out.
It's nice for me to be able to bring a band that I know that you guys at least like a member of and have liked the work in the past at least a little, because it's not like an Eve 6 or Matchbox 20 where you guys are kind of along for the ride and you might find something you like. This is a band where at least some of their works or parts of their Divergent work you've been interested in or quite enjoyed.
I've always been a fan of the Gorillaz ever since their very first album. I mean, especially with culminating in Demon Days. I mean, I thought that album was wildly new for the time, and it showed an artist who had his hand in a bunch of different things and was able to kind of rally them all together in sort of one fairly unique thing for the time. I really couldn't even compare them to anybody as of 2005. I could cite influences, but when the album was released, I was just like, that's a new artist.
Yeah, and I like that they created this mystique around the band because they created these characters, which added to that band. But we're not reviewing the Gorillaz, we are reviewing Blur. Again, the album is The Magic Whip, so why don't we get into it?
Magic Whip, yes. And the first track is Lonesome Street. Now, I immediately heard a lot of those 90s influences that you referenced. From just the beginning here, it starts hinting at the street side barrenness. In the first few seconds, there's sirens in the background. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, this little clean, patched guitar brings us down the blues scale and into probably the most 90s riff I've heard in years. Maybe, dare I say, since the 90s. And that even includes 90s bands that we've done here. Essentially throw a dart into the 90s, and whatever rock band you strike will probably have used this riff or something similar to it, but that's not a bad thing. It's a fun riff. Although there's that little learning curve where at the beginning of albums I'm pretty accepting of things. So again, here it's all just nostalgia, and it's carefree, harmless nostalgia at this point. To describe it just a bit, it's a fairly heavy riff. It's guitar-driven for sure, but all the instruments are pretty much in just the same groove. 2 guitars at least, as far as I can tell, tied very closely with the drums. The bass is there, but it's pretty muffled. It's almost inaudible, partially because it's also so tied with the riff, so it's bound to blend in, but also because of the recording quality. The whole thing kind of almost has this live recording appeal. Both the guitars and the bass, it seems like they make no attempt to really disguise the effect of the amplifier reverberating. There's like a slight muddiness in there, which is, I think, what evokes that 90s feel so strongly with me. We think of the 90s as being a much dirtier era, by choice, of course, with its studio work more in tune with the ballroom live acoustics, and I heard this right as of that opening riff. Obviously, that's a generalization. Not everybody was doing that back in the 90s, but it was a definite trend, and I kind of see a little bit of a throwback here, even if it's to themselves.
Yeah, I definitely see that as well. And what I really like about it is that, again, what you said, it's fun. It's not just a band that's imitating the 90s or just banking on it. There's, this is exactly pretty much what I expected from Blur the minute I turned on the album. Like, I was not surprised by this sound being what I came up with and what I've been listening to from them over the years. So it was nice to kind of be engaged by that immediately, sort of like what we experienced with Modest Mouse.
Right, and it's those subtle elements, that's really what make it. Again, it's not that emulation, it's those subtle little things that hit it back. At the end of the day, this is really like Anywhere Rocksville, but that's a good thing, that you can't quite place it. It's just those little elements, the recording quality, and things that seem to like harken back a bit. But that's a subtle enough element that I chalk it up to delicate procedure.
And another little subtle element, that slight out-of-tune nature throughout the whole song. Everything was just a little bit off. Timing may have been just a little bit off.
There did seem to be something in the way that the guitars like reacted together. Or again, perhaps the way it reacts with the amplifier like reverberating, or the way it's mic'd or something. It almost sounds like there's a dissonance in there that is not created by an actual dissonance, but it's created by the recording quality itself. Again, very subtle, very delicate. And
that was, for me, even a stronger link back to the 90s. That, the more echoey-oriented voice, there's a lot of just, it feels like nostalgia is going to be a main focus, not just with this song, but of this entire album. If you're going to go this heavy this early on.
Right. Well, I'll get to the voice in just 1 second. First, I'll just mention a couple notes about the chordal work here. First of all, it starts off as nothing terribly complex. The chords kind of pivot back and forth between D major and B major, which sort of hints at like stepping us out of the key with this secondary dominant. B major sort of serves as the 5/2 for D major. But it's not like we resolve to the 2, we just pivot. Again, it's a fun riff, it's a good stage setter, and it keeps it very, very lighthearted. And from there, of course, we go into the verse, which utilizes the same exact riff. It's just the new element is his voice. And that's what I really wanted to address here, because that was something that was interesting for me, not really having the same background experience with Blur as you do, Matt, to hear him sort of invoke this almost punk style in this, or at least punk perhaps as it would be in Britain, even as early as the 80s, and I felt that in his delivery here in the verses.
Well, I think what's funny about that you only notice that now, is as someone who's a fan of the majority of his work, I will admit that his solo record didn't seem to have that kind of a twinge to it. But Gorillaz stuff, some of it definitely did. But I think because of the way it was presented and the way 2D delivered the lyrics, there was still a little bit of a difference. I could hear it in the Gorillaz because I'm used to it from Blur, but someone coming the other way around, I guess I could see how it would kind of be a surprise.
Yeah, no, that's probably the kind of thing that creeps up on you. But yeah. It's the matter-of-factual delivery, I think, that is probably what lends itself to that punk environment. It's just that with the production quality was so high on the Gorillaz, it all seemed to just blend in and work together in a modern way, whereas here everything is thinned back and there's the harkening back in the musical element, so it seems as if it's standing out more to me as a direct link to punk.
This combination delivered with the lines, and I really do enjoy the lines right off the bat. I'm used to Blur being a little bit nonsensical.
A little bit.
That's what I like. That's what I like about a lot of music. As recently as Modest Mouse, just going back to the nonsensical idea, to really be a little off the cuff, but still trying to tell a story in your own way, always intrigues me. And to have the chorus work, and if you have nobody left to rely on, I'll hold you in my arms and let you drift. It's got to be that time again, and June will be over soon again. That chorus, his delivery is just so spot on for how he's pairing it up with the vocals and with the slight change from the verse work to the chorus work.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that as the chorus, because that was a transition to me that was so stark. It seemed almost to like take away from like the verse work, for instance. As I described, like the element that leads us into that is really more of a hook in anything.
Yeah.
The riff is I feel that is almost the chorus in itself. It's the thing that the song keeps jumping back to and anchoring itself back to. And the fact that that simply plays over the verses in the background is almost just, you know, it's besides the point. It still is, that's where the song wants to be. But the bolder departure here is in the exact spot that John just read. It's this transition that immediately took me out of this familiar environment and into something wholly new, which got me really excited for this album. It's as if the song suddenly took on a much more mystical air. It steps over to F sharp minor, which is the minor third for D, and that's kind of what like an earlier chord had hinted at. Halfway through, I remember in the verse there was a little reference to like C sharp minor where we just stepped over there just for a moment. But, you know, it still keeps with the secondary dominant thing. This time is like a 5 chord of something to come, and that was this thing right here, the 5 of F sharp minor, which is where we are now. And in here, it just sort of we're entrenched in this environment. It feels like we're pivoting back and forth between the earlier 5/2 B major, which serves as this chord, F sharp minor, serves as that chord straight up 4 chord. So it's almost like a modulation at this point. It felt like the song had shifted that intensely into this more mystical environment. There are a lot of other reasons apart from just chordal reasons as to why I feel this.
But it's because of that major shift I'm going to regard it as the chorus. Because otherwise, it's really very much the freeform nature of the song itself that defeats the whole chorus, verse. They're merely, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, the flow of it and everything like that is just a series of different verses going on there. But because this part gets harkened back to, both lyrically and to some extent musically, I'd have to regard it as sort of like the the anti-anthem of a chorus.
Yeah, but see, there's a problem with that because at the very, very end of this song, we actually do have a more anthemy thing, and that is, in fact, the title, Going Down to Lonesome Street, and we have to wait the entire song before we get to that point, and that really utilizes the same riff that is in what we've been calling the verse and the hook. Hence, I just can't see that as the chorus. It's the kind of thing that when you read, it feels so separate. And again, delivery. This is what I really want to address with this section here, or transition bridge, as I will be calling it. There's a lot of elements that add to the mystical effect here, apart from just the chords. For one thing, the guitars drop out completely. I mean, again, that's been steady throughout the hook, throughout the verse, that we just had this steady, unchanging riff, and all of a sudden they're gone. And the drums, which were also fairly steady, they thin down to just very delicate eighth notes just on the hi-hat. And then an entire choir of I assume the band's vocals, or perhaps himself doubled several times, they divvy up the harmonies of both of these chords, the F sharp minor and the B major. In addition to that, you also have like these almost folk-like comping instruments. It sounded almost like flute instruments. I couldn't quite pin that down, but again, that's really, I think, the more mystical side of this. And then in addition to that, you also have to address his vocals and the manner in which he's singing those lyrics. All of a sudden, it's not really punk style anymore. It's a lot more longing and filled with this little twang of sadness, kind of just gliding on with the mysticism that he's created. It's quite beautiful, and they're not playful anymore as he was back when he was singing in the verses lyrics. I mean, granted, of course, that punk style lends itself to, you know, more quirkier deliveries. I noticed, especially when I was talking about that 80s style punk, there's this like staccato manner of speaking that was really popular at the time. Just short emphases on syllables. A lot of times that didn't work in the song's favor because then you couldn't hear what he was saying. But that's separate in this case. You can hear all those verse lyrics. But here, it's separate. He just treated this as a chance to croon by contrast.
And what I really like, that both musically and vocally it does go through shifts. You kind of have this happy-go-lucky kind of demeanor and emotionality of the verses, quote-unquote, of the track. But when you get to this different instrumentation, you're right. He does hit a more longing kind of almost 2D style singing. 2D, the character from the Gorillaz. A more drawn-out, slowed intent singing that definitely has a completely different style from the earlier part.
Right, and then out of that, we get an even more unexpected transition. I was like, all right, if you want to move to F sharp minor and B major, that's great. You can pivot between two chords, but it's not what he did instead. And I have to reference these things because these are things we actually just don't get quite a lot in a lot of the pop music or pop-oriented music that we've been reviewing. All of a sudden, here he just decides to take this unexpected transition, the choiring that was being sung using those two chords, they sort of slide downward. It's like a pitch bend, just kind of like warped our impressions of what this mystical world really is. And everything just thins out, and now all of a sudden a lone guitar steps forward. And for the first time, a really clean bass steps in here, a clean audible, and we have this B-flat augmented chord, which is as mystical as it gets, frankly, in terms of chord work. And that's just a half a step down from where we were. It was actually my favorite moment in this song, and actually one of my favorite moments on the album, dare I say that right up front. Because after that, we do jump right back to the verses, and now all of a sudden you have a new set of lyrics. So get yourself up, get past on your way. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Taking off again, the 514 to East Grinstead, you sent me off to sea. We're going up, 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 coursing on our greatest night. And talking types will let us down again. Talk, you're arse all night, you want to be there. And this is still in the very much same line as the very first verse. It's actually, it's the same riff, essentially. This is where the song wants to be, I feel. It's the verse, but it utilizes the riff. That is the strongest part, and that's what's going to come back much later in the track.
There is a different element that gets added into this on top of it, and that is this synth beat. And this is the first time when knowing Blur, separate from all of his other work, knowing Blur, to have a synth in there was a great addition for the song itself. It took us outside of the realm of just the purely natural music that I kind of associate with them, and brought in the other elements that had been worked upon with the Gorillaz, with his individual work, and added a new little, jolt of energy to this second verse.
Well, that synth was there earlier, but I agree it was a lot more playful. Even the vocals seemed more playful here, especially the way he just says, up, 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 up. I love that because he actually kind of goes up the scale at that moment. It's again, it's a quirky little choice, and it's right up with what Damon Albarn likes to do.
I also like the quirky choice that when he says going down, there's a bomb-dropping soundbite, like in a cartoon.
And
there's a whistle.
His voice follows it, too.
Voice follows it, yeah.
He's a very animated singer, and he's really showcasing both sides of this animation. The more out there kind of a piece in what I call the chorus, and the more quirky, character-driven pieces within the verses.
Exactly. And then, lo and behold, he has yet another transition later on, which was another very strange chord change. Out of that last B major chord, we're thrusted to an E flat major, which is a very strange choice. As if, the B major was the flat six of this new home and modulation. But that's not the case, because then all of a sudden we're thrust into E major, a whole step modulation, and this is the first time I could actually certifiably say it's a modulation as opposed to just a momentary shift. Because we repeat the riff again. We have a new set of verses here. For just a few chords themselves, and then an inventive modulation brings us right back to D. So, I have a hard time actually perceiving what he was doing with this song. I'm just along for the ride, and that's what I like best about it. I love the fact that I can't name what's the chorus and what's the verse. Instead, it's just him taking me through his world. I feel like he's, I don't know, put on the Willy Wonka hat or something. I mean, not that this is terribly weird music, but again, for what people generally perceive as oh yeah, it's a 90s band, and the way in which he kind of tricks you at the outset with something that would seem a lot more straightforward.
Well, to be clear, also, they've experimented with this kind of stuff throughout their career. They've not just been a straight indie band, probably since the 90s. They really did kind of play with stuff, with synth and with, beats and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it was clear that during the career of Blur that Damon Albarn wanted to do more, and that could be why they took a hiatus, because he wanted to do other things that the band itself wasn't going completely into, and that's why he formed the Gorillaz and he did a solo project. But it does still, of course, absolutely have its roots in that indie rock sound, but they've always had a little more than that.
Right, but of course that is what he chooses to end the track on, is that indie rock sound that plays over the chorus. And if you have nobody left to rely on, I'll hold you in my arms and let you drift, going down to Lonesome Street, going down to Lonesome Street. And that's pretty much the way the track plays out. And he introduces more little quirky elements. It ends with all that whistling and then, you know, more quirkier synth. And it's just him having fun at that point.
And I both love and hate the repetitive nature of that last little line, going down to Lonesome Street. I want to hate it, only because it's kind of a trope to just repeat. But the fact that he does change it up, not vocally, not so much, but to really fool around with the music and to have not epic, but, you know, something akin to the quirky side of epic, I guess, to really fool around with it and play with it, it's a nice little way to end the introduction to your album, to end that first track and to be like, all right, now let's get on with the show.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it certainly puts perspective as to why that's the chorus. It's just we had to wait for it. It's the chorus we've really been hearing since the beginning. It's just, you know, now he's got a statement. So that brings us to track 2, New World Towers. I appreciated this as a transition, as the logical next step from where he was starting.
Right, and it's very smooth, going right into a vocal and piano paired intro. It was very, kind of had that radio voice that John's brought up before.
And I love his radio voice. I hate it a lot of times, but I love his radio voice.
Damon Albarn's radio voice happens to be one of my favorite things also, and it's really, really good here, and it's paired very well with the piano. I like his range. Damon Albarn kind of stays in a comfortable zone, but he still has ups and downs. He doesn't just kind of ride very run-of-the-middle. He does have a variation.
Well, this is that sort of quintessential, like, rustic piano. You know, it's if you could have a rustic piano, I mean, it's in the background, it's fairly lo-fi, and it's just rustling along in the background with this A minor. And, yeah, he sings a pretty plainly A minor melody here, but what I really like about it is what he does over that. Again, he's a post-production master as far as what we've encountered. He interrupts himself with what I gather is himself.
Just hunts here and there, but these
or
little
ahs,
or
but
ahs
they're
or
like
oohs.
these post-production vocalizations of a single note that step in right over his melody, and they tend to hint at very dissonant tones, considering that his melody is very, very sternly in A minor, and yet I think he steps forward with these notes that just don't quite match whatever chord he's on at that moment, and I love it. These little non-chord tones, they're unique, and they paint this out to be sort of a dissonant departure from the first track.
And he doesn't just use it to make interruptions. Sometimes he will pause his vocals in order to get one of those in. Sometimes he'll actually try to sing over one of those. It's an odd choice, but frankly, it's very chaotic, but still conforms with the melody itself. It's a really, really interesting idea. The one thing is, I would have liked him to potentially do a little bit further range on this.
I agree 100%. It was there in the very, very beginning. It didn't really persist. Instead, the track kind of goes through different directions. We get quite a few verses before we actually get a chorus. The second verse sort of layers on different elements. The percussion steps in much thicker with what I'd probably call his signature style percussion. It's something that's just wholly him. I hear him do it just about all of his work. These stumps step in much stronger with these like watery effects in the background. Everything sounds a little bit submersed. The bass steps in, it's sparser, but it comes in at really key moments.
And that's one of my favorite parts of this song, the bass. The bass it's not just walking, it's fully talking, it's working with everything else. But because it doesn't have a lot to say, it's more important to hear it where it lands. And its punctuation is just so great over the very pared down. But there is that further element that he introduces later on in the verses, the guitar.
What I really like about the
third verse, I think.
What I really like about the acoustic riff guitar here is that it's very reminiscent of El Mañana from the Gorillaz. It has that kind of twang, you know, and that song, of course, is all guitar-driven. That whole song is all guitar and vocals. And it had that same kind of hollow acoustic sound that I really love. It creates a guitar groove that kind of really pulls the song forward.
And it also seems like that's the moment where this like makes it shift back into the chorus. It's like born right out of these this third verse lyrics. Green, green, the neon green, New World towers, plane flying overhead, satellite showers. Falls like confetti on the cavalcade, the flashboat sea no longer is reflecting in you. And he kind of slows down toward the end here, I noticed. And then all of a sudden he changes it up with the chorus, which only comprises of a really stronger more impactful melody here. He steps in and it's just a lot more pivotal. 7 on me, 7 on me, 7 on the left-hand side, 7 on me. I thought that was absolutely beautiful at this point. I mean, I don't know. There's just something about the slow, relaxed pace of this track that I was very attracted to and unoffended by. Some people could perceive it as dull.
No.
It's too early in the album for me to really even start judging in that department.
Well, if the bass was the statement, the guitar was the response to that statement, and all around, all they did was talk to one another while the vocals were going on, while the rest of the story, and the percussion. All these elements coming together, it's like you have different conversations going on at once.
Well, it seemed as if the bass had its own solo there also, like
that
following
was the solo
the chorus itself. It was
with a sort of like organ piece that was synthesized. I don't know what was going on right there, but that bass combination between the two was really, well, first off, great bass solo, something new that I always loved.
You know why I liked it also? Because it sounded kind of Spanish influenced, like the bass itself. Granted, of course, whenever anybody plays, the acoustic guitar in such a fashion, it's very easy to go back, look, that's that Spanish influenced guitar.
Well,
because,
sure,
of course.
And the song that I referenced, El Mañana, is littered with it, so
but
of course it's
here,
connected.
He was able to do the same thing with the bass, and I don't hear that
Ever?
Yeah, ever. Yeah, I mean, that's just that's a credit to the bassist himself.
As far as I'm concerned about this song, though, it is the seminal slow groove, like especially that I've heard in a while. It fits that nice little niche so perfectly, and I'm just along for the ride. Like, I have no questions or quips. I know that it doesn't have huge highs and lows, but it's not supposed to. It's just kind of supposed to mellow you out, man. Just go along for the ride.
Well, what I like about it, going back to the likening to conversations, each instrument is sort of having a different thing that they're doing, different conversation. They all end up being not quite background, but it's like hearing a bunch of different people having a bunch of different conversations that somehow just all work together. They all come together and make a solid piece. It feels very natural to have all this chaos thrown together. And, well, frankly, the final product might be my best song. My favorite song on the album.
This song is up there for me. I don't know if it's my favorite yet, but for sure, I really liked... You know what it was that was nice about this song is that it's rare that you get to an emotional place on an album so early where you just feel comfortable. And it's not comfortable to a point of boredom. It's comfortable as in you feel comfort. You feel relaxed.
You feel at ease.
You feel at ease, yeah.
I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that this track kind of jump-started a trend on this album that we'll see later on, and that's sort of like this penchant for a beach-like environment that comes through with almost like little reggae rhythms at times. Again, really subtle things that I think are partially just aided with his vocals themselves, which are very relaxed and feel as if he's crooning to you like by a beachside and the sun is low, and I don't know, it's almost like minstrel-like vocals. And yeah, I just, in general, I was ready to deal with that environment. And it's also, again, this is early in the album. He could kind of take it anywhere from here. So from there,
he does take it anywhere. Sorry, I couldn't pass up that transition.
Yeah, go anywhere. In this case, go out. Yeah.
This track starts with a lot of guitar distortion. I mean, a lot. And it's
defined by like screeching, almost a feedback sound.
Soundbite kind of quality, which, I mean, is not foreign for things that he's done before, but it did seem a little odd to kind of have this ear-piercing guitar distortion followed by drum and bass right away.
It's a little funky, and that's a little bit of a different element that he's introducing.
Well, the drum and bass following that distortion is what gives it that kind of funky feel. It's not funk with a capital F.
Of course not.
But it's definitely got elements of...
I feel the need to defend my funk or something. No, but I mean, I get the strut. I think let's use that word for this track.
More appropriate.
A slight strut here. At the same time, it also can become a little bit trudging, and then when you combine that with that screeching, it's almost unnerving intentionally, just at the outset. First of all, this really kind of thinned down the chordal structure of this album quite a bit. This song is in A minor, and it basically just goes between that and F major. So 1 major 6, minor 1 major 6, and that's pretty much the whole entire song. So much that I could really detect the punk roots in this track. We're back to that again. It's not just in the chordal progression here, but it's also in the vocal delivery, which is similar, if not even really furthering what he was doing in the first track. I mean, his delivery is so stuttered, so stifled at times. He almost is doing that thing that a lot of punk rockers do, which is cut off their vocals to the point that you can't quite understand what they're doing. And of course, a lot of that is, the accent gap that exists across the Atlantic Ocean. But there's really a vocal style, and it was a powerful musical element. I'm a little bit hesitant about its placement yet.
To be fair, though, it's not unexpected for Blur or for Damon's vocals, because one of the things about Song 2 that made it so popular also at the time was, besides the chorus, no one knew how the lyrics works. The way he delivered them in the original, when that song originally came out, it was just, you couldn't just Google the lyrics back then. So it was very kind of, what is he saying? Yeah, I got my head checked. I don't understand. What are these lyrics?
If you're lucky, you'll get them in the book jacket.
Right.
But then usually, I remember a lot of punk album covers tended to be
just 2 pages, no 2
pages,
lyrics.
or sometimes like filled with all this like heavy printer ink that you can barely even read the lyrics because they choose some like asinine font.
So singing in that style is not foreign to him. But I do agree that at this point also, once we get to like the midpoint of the song, and I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, the clutter gets so apparent that between the singing style, which he's known for, but is also a little low and hard to understand, plus the clutter, plus the distortion, now you really can't understand what he's saying.
Well, it's a split problem there. I'm not so sure that the sound effects were really like stopping me from hearing what he was saying. It was more like a separate issue. Like, it felt like that there was content here, or if the content was about to like burgeon forth into something else, then it became very clear like this is a thin track that is enhanced and made most palatable by the fact that he puts stuff in the way.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I'm serious. Like,
Fair.
that's what sound effects are, and he has such a liking to this little things here from the left ear, from the right ear, little pops, little sizzles, and they're at their peak here. And instead of really reacting with the whole, they're just acting, and no one really asked them to.
Well, by the midpoint, especially going past the midpoint and really bad at the end, the bass that I was thoroughly enjoying, it's still there, but it's hard to pick out, and I kind of wanted to fit with that groove. The guitar, the rude but fun guitar that was going up and down and around and accenting everything, it was still there, but it was hard to follow. The chorus, it's grittier, it's got more of that rude fun in it, and that's kind of like the summation of what's going on here. There's a lot of fun in the instruments, but they're getting in each other's way. They are being moved.
See, again, I want to reel it back a little bit. It's not that they're getting in each other's way. It's not that anything I think in this track is hard to follow. I find it very digestible. It's just they're...
No. Let me rephrase that.
They're color, and this track consists mostly of color.
No. Let me rephrase. Everything is getting in front of each other. They're all vying. The little tidbits, the little sound bites that are going up there, even his vocal work. It's vying for center stage, so you can't really focus on any one thing. Because once you start getting into that bass groove, well, something's going to pop in your ear, and you're going to lose track of it.
See, I just don't hear it that way. That's not my point.
I feel that they both coexist. I feel like the real problem with that is that it doesn't go anywhere. With all of this stuff going on, we still kind of stay in the same place. And lyrically, it doesn't really either. I mean, there's some interesting lyrics here, but all in all, it kind of gets lost to the mess. I mean,
well, that speaks to the song itself, the message itself. It's very much a kind of a drudgery, kind of a piece when you look at the lyrics and start digesting those.
I mean, that said, I still enjoyed the track. I just felt like it could have done more with it or gone somewhere. Maybe drop some of the stuff out or put more in. Make it a wall of sound for a second to jar your audience and then bring their attention in with a sharp, silent lyric part. Like, I don't know, something like that. Have a variation of some kind instead of just kind of doing nothing with a lot.
Yeah, actually, that's a really concise way to put it. Essentially, I think I'm really more with Matt here as far as my approach to this track. I think that a lot of these sound effects, as cool as they can be and as intelligent as they can be from a post-production standpoint, I think they disguise the fact that there's really no content here. Musically, that is. Lyrically, it could be argued something to the contrary. I'd like to just read a little bit here, starting with the first verse. I'm getting sad alone, dancing with myself. Greedy go-getter goal, the luxury of stealth. I'm seedy and the whole, dancing with myself. I get into my bed, I do it to myself. I just want to put it out that that's great writing. That's great.
Is.
That's great, almost like beat poetry. if taken from beat poetry in that delivery. But instead, because he uses the more punk-style delivery, it actually kind of works. Again, it's not that I can't understand him. It was really more just that I was, like, questioning what he was doing at this point. I'm curious about the content, and that's why he's just kind of like, all right, he's putting other stuff in the way. Maybe there's clutter in his life. I start thinking about this. To the local. I go out. To the local. By myself. To the local. I did it to my head. There's nothing to be addressed now. There's nothing to get up about. Because we do it all the time. The shepherd is undone. Done it all again. I get ready to go. The greed go-getter con. See, this is interesting. I feel like we're getting somewhat of, like, a confused mental state. Or a journal entry of sorts in a stream of consciousness.
But the problem with that is, as we've said before, we're getting that from reading it.
We're getting it from reading it.
In the context of the song, even if we can't understand the lyrics in the context of the song is not doing enough to paint a picture, and the lyrics alone don't carry it.
And I would make the argument, and I know a lot of people would make the argument that the sound effects do carry it, as in, like, the clutter of life or something,
sure.
Or the confused mental state. But I would argue that doesn't. I would say that is that's kind of forcing it in a way. You know, hammering it home with external pieces as opposed to the central portion. So that was kind of a shame. Again, it's still a very, very listenable track in my opinion. I do not think it's.
It's definitely not a wall of sound.
Yeah,
for sure not.
Yeah. And, of course, you know, the instrumental can be kind of cool, too. The sounds tend to get more industrial, and I still think it's just that it's a great experiment to hear, again, what he can do, because he's a very, very talented
remember, Damon Albarn's
guy.
The same post-production guy that released one of the Gorillaz albums, a kind of B-sides album, but it was all done on his iPad by himself. He did all the vocals, he did all the instrumentation, all of it on a single iPad. I mean, that's an impressive production experiment.
He strikes me as the kind of guy who can literally just, like, take a subway train and get off and he has a song in his head just from, like, hearing sounds.
Yeah.
You know? I feel like he applies this stuff later. I can see him as the guy that carries around a recorder. Who knows? And
he was probably recording the subway train and goes home, remixes it, and boom,
that's
he's
what
got
I had
the
originally heard
song.
as, like, the local, and, like, oh, take the local, as opposed to the express.
Let's move on to the next track. Track 4, Ice Cream Man. I mean, from an overall perspective, I actually quite enjoyed this song just because it was a little quirky, and I like quirky. But it starts with a very techie intro, the most techie intro we've kind of gotten. Clearly synth of some kind or a computer, lots of beep boop, as John likes to say. That builds pretty gradually.
Even chordally, it builds gradually. We start off with just kind of like pivoting between 1 and 5, then it seems to take on, again, gradually, it seems to take on more of a basic 4-chord progression, which was just minor 1, minor 5, major 6, major 7, kind of crawling its way back up to 1, but that's the round that persists, again, for probably the duration of this song. There might be some moments where it departs, but that's really where this song exists.
It doesn't really go outside of that. But I think that's designed to better accentuate the vocal style that's presented in the song.
Right. And also, in this case, I'm going to say that the sound effects are a little bit more integrated. I mean, there's sort of this accompanying, sort of rapidly arpeggiating synth that goes with each of these chords, it seems, and not always matching the chords. There's something like a little bit off about it. It arpeggiates, and it feels like it warbles a little bit, and there's something off about it. Again, maybe that like slight little hint at dissonance, but I like it. The only problem is that this seems very contrasted sectionally with a much more like jam-like guitar-bass combo. And I don't know, something about that was kind of back to the beach environment that we heard in, like, track 2, and I felt like it didn't quite match with... I want to hear his more interesting sound effect here. This time, it had potential, and he didn't do anything with it.
I was very disappointed, especially when, after that first little beat work, the synth riff gets added to the guitar, the bass, the sort of chimey work that's off in the background that's still a little bit divorced from the other soundbite-ish pieces that were going on. It all felt like there was 2 songs going on at once, and these songs weren't quite meshing. Natural versus synthetic, or however you want to put it, they weren't as uniform. They were by no means separate entities, but it was two sides of a different coin going on right there, and it was a little bit jarring, especially when really he goes heavy into the more natural sounding guitar work and things like that. The synth riff, I couldn't get out of my head. I just kept hearing it over and over again. Even though it really was a background piece, it was stuck there for me.
So, I felt that was... Like, after a while, I didn't even notice anymore. Actually, it was the kind of thing, to clarify my point, it was the kind of thing that felt like it was going to develop into something else, but then once I realized it was really just the riff, then I accepted it.
Yeah, it's just kind of blended into the background for me also. What I also like, though, mostly about this track, the key point for me is the vocals. I feel like the music... I agree with John, though not for the same reasons, but I agree with John that the music did kind of not really go anywhere. It kind of just stayed in this one place. But the vocals, I like...
two places, actually.
Those two places. But I like the way the vocals were delivered. It was almost like, this ice cream man, this ain't your kid's ice cream man. Like, this is a creepy ice cream man. You don't want the kids anywhere near this ice cream man.
Yeah, but it doesn't come off as fully creepy when you read the lyrics. That's my...
No,
it's
it doesn't.
weird. I don't know what the lyrics are supposed to mean. And this is something I don't normally claim, but I can't really find or pin down the one metaphor that might explain this song. I don't know that there's a metaphor.
I think it's just supposed to be a little odd. I think the whole song is just supposed to be a little odd.
Well, okay, looking at the third verse, after the first two verses were kind of on the nose describing an ice cream man, the third one, here comes the ice cream man parked at the end of the road with a swish of his magic whip.
Title.
All the people in the party froze. I was only 21 when I watched it on TV. I was racing in my heart, and then... something new, something new. Of course. But I don't know, like, okay, something weird happened. There's
but they don't go into
description.
detail, yeah.
It's tantalizing if it was a little bit better presented, but I want this fulfilled. I want the story here, because they were like, it's an ice cream man, here's chocolate chip, rocky road, what have you, and then something happened. What is it? You gotta tell me here. You gotta tell me here.
I mean... Yeah, it's really strange because there's like actually an innocence that comprises most of this track. I think that the verses and the delivery sometimes feels very childlike. Going back to the very first verse, here comes the ice cream man, parked to the end of the road. With the swish of his magic whip, all the people in the party froze. Actually, it's much the same as later, until Screwball, chocolate chip, umbrella in his white glove hand, shade from the sun was his intention. It's just a little bit more descriptive, and most of the track is him being descriptive in this sort of childlike, very attached to the meter kind of delivery, and I enjoyed that, and the music matches it in at least the relaxed sense, but there is something more to the story, and I want it.
This is not our Gene Wilder Willy Wonka. It's our weird-ass Johnny Depp Willy Wonka.
Yeah, but Willy Wonka, that movie, regardless of how good you think it is still has a conclusion. Still has something.
You realize
to it.
that I would never let my kid go over to the Johnny Depp ice cream truck.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the point. I think, but I agree. The story is definitely anticlimactic. I think that's the word we're really looking for. Is there's no resolution and it's anticlimactic. I still enjoyed the song as a whole, but I felt like it just left me wanting.
Musically, I thought it was simply this. It either has the problem of being too relaxed or not relaxed enough. Again, there's two logical directions he could have taken this. Instead, he just kind of walks down the medium, and that may very well be the goal, to leave us wondering.
WTF.
And even there's musical elements that step in here, like the bass solo steps in here. Pretty bland. It's not really a solo. It just kind of has its own little
it's a
bass
feature
line.
more than a solo.
Yeah, it repeats its own riff, and that's pretty much it. It's bland. It's repetitive. 4-chord progression, and there's just very little else. Actually, the only thing I liked about this was the chorus, the way he delivers the lines, something new.
Yeah, the way he sings it, yeah.
Yeah, and especially that something new, something new, something you'd.
Yeah.
Again, he even lets us, he leaves the story hanging on that.
It's definitely intentional.
You would want. I hate you.
No, you don't.
No, I don't. This is enjoyable.
All right, on to track 5. Thought I was a spaceman.
Because we're not weird enough.
This intro, though, I'll say it, I think it was flawless. This intro was just...
smooth.
So
it was
so
like,
enjoyable. So Steve, give us a little detail on this intro.
This was one of my favorite things on the album, frankly. This sort of like crash cymbal roll, and it builds and builds to this very light but motion-filled, like heartbeat sounding drum box. Now this track is full of texture from here on in.
Yeah.
I mean, the very first chord you hear is delivered to us by cellos. They step in here with maybe doubled with like a light synth in the background, but what I mostly hear is a slow drone of cellos with that slight, parabola, volume parabola that a cello would have. It builds to that little peak and then slowly decays. Slow attack, slow decay, and it gives us this very warm C major 7. And over this, we're joined by like spurts of light acoustic guitars, just drenched in echo and in reverb, almost more in echo though. They step in and then there's a few little, follow-ups before they finally decay. In addition to that, a lot of times it's not just an acoustic guitar strum, it's more of the steel string slides. You feel like the fingers sliding up the steel strings, from fret to fret, and they swoop in from afar. They're not born out of the phrase. Again, that's a separate track. There's the acoustic guitars that sort of step in a lot more cleanly, and they echo themselves, but then so do these like steel string slides. They're added in post-production. But there's lots of overlap here, and this is a much more delicate and expertly composed example of post-production sound effects than we had earlier on. Here I don't detect this as clutter. This is the setting. Like, this is everything. This is not just the setting, but it's the place he wants us to live in.
It's sort of a drift, which I like. I like not having a concrete area. It's a setting, but it's a very expansive setting. This, when you start coupling it with the great range of his vocal work and the pacing, the lovely, great pacing he's doing in his vocals, really puts me in the zone of, well, the spaceman he thought he was.
Well, also about his vocals, he does the radio voice again, but because of the echo filter he has on it, it gives it a very spacey feel, like singing in a helmet, or just
a
singing.
little on the nose, but I'm okay with it being so on the nose because it fits. It fits perfectly with what he's doing.
It adds to the setting, and it really reels you in. And also, what I really love...
Well, the only thing I have to curb that there is that I really don't get a space vibe here. I mean, title aside, frankly, this is really back to that almost beachside environment, but nowhere near as generic. This is like, I almost felt like I was on the shores of Greece or something like that.
And that's why it's not quite space. It's more adrift. It's more a distance from things, for me.
Well, it's
more
also the warmth of everything. The fact that he invoked a cello, and also that when the acoustic guitar, and this includes both those steel string slides and when it's just strumming cleanly, it sounds very Spanish-influenced. More straight up this time, again, like we had Spanish-influenced bass earlier. Well, now, obviously, you gotta reel it back with the guitar. It was absolutely beautiful. I wanted him to stay here so bad I did.
And he didn't, and it was a very natural progression of what he goes into. This is the biggest, I don't know if it's a complaint or not, because where the song does end up going, when it starts adding in sort of the shakerish noises, and then sort of the extra add-on tones, and then the extra drum work and everything like that, these work as individual add-ons and build-up pieces, but I don't think it's adding to the setting itself. This is a pure place where he's composing it, but it's cluttering it at the same time.
Well, there was certainly some stepwise motion here. Like, for instance, when he enters, there's a few verses we get of this before we have anything even close to like a chorus. He steps in with, a few little changes just to, like, modify the existing material. The drum box that was there since the very, very beginning, which was very, very light. Again, it's just like a slight little, just really keeps the rhythm going. That's all it is. But it sort of changes itself a little bit. It either starts to warm up, or maybe it's an added effect for the Spanish guitar, where it starts to sound like it's being a little bit muffled. But it's just like a spotlight shift that occurs here, and that was a development in texture that I really appreciated. It's really the ultimate shift that I thought to be kind of like an artistic screw you. But granted, of course, in this case, I'm not. I still think it was a great development. I think as far as the music was concerned, but I think that it was a little bit, it robbed me of the potential of the setting, which was one of our strongest yet.
I want to talk and touch on the vocals a bit, because besides feeling spacey, what I really like is the way he delivers the lyrics here.
The
Especially
pacing, yeah.
the pacing of the verses that Steve was mentioning the verses before. He inserts pauses, and I talk up pauses all the time when we have them on an album. But here, really, he does take his time with each line, and it really adds an impact to the delivery, which I enjoy.
I agree.
And this stays throughout the whole song, but when you're going from this sort of drifting area that I'm loving to a sort of a movement-oriented piece, and then towards the end to really just becoming not quite frantic, but just full of a lot of things going on, it definitely ends up being... Well, I see that he was trying to progress, and he did progress from one to the next, but I miss that starting point. I miss home. I miss that first thing we were dealing with.
It felt like it was sort of ripped from what it once was. I'm not going to even come close to use the word like, a divorced section. Again, it's still expert composition. But it just feels broader and more busier. Again, the same concept, just like putting stuff in the way. It almost feels like an antithesis to what started. And really, we're still kind of like walking through the verses. But, he tacks on... The drums are so much heavier, and it supplants that texture, and I just wasn't digging it. I realize that here I'm in, like, full-on... I'm in my critic's pants, essentially. Like, I think it was a great track, but now it's just a matter of choice, matter of direction. It's like sort of learning to love a character, and then there's that scene where they do something out of character, and you're just like, why? I'm not going to stop reading the book. It's just, this is just cannon fodder for my complaining in my book club. Not that I have a book club.
You
but
definitely have a book club.
No,
You know what? We
definitely
should have a
don't.
book club. I'll join your book club. I
Okay,
read a lot
cool.
of books.
Okay, cool. I don't read as much as I should, but I imagine it's something like that. I think that's a close analogy.
I think that's a good jumping off point to the next track. So we go from here to I Broadcast, which is number 6 from the get, and I know that you guys are going to disagree with me a little bit. Even though there was safety in moments of this track, I think overall it was quirky and fun. I did really enjoy it. I never really disliked it. However, it starts out doing something really interesting structurally, and then goes really safe really fast.
We got another new idea here. I love it. He keeps introducing new quirky ideas. This one, another one of his weird tones and combinations and melody work that he's going on.
I would describe it as a little Flying Lotus-y.
That's okay. That's okay. But what's not okay for this song is when the, quote, band, the guitar, the drums, the bass, the sort of stuff that you get with a natural, on-the-stage sort of band work, the classic style, that's always safe. He keeps going back to the home base where he knows how to make his guitar. They know how to make their drums. I don't want that. I want that Lotus, that Flying Lotus. For all that I'm scared of Flying Lotus, I kind of enjoyed it.
For reference, Flying Lotus is more of an electronica artist that we reviewed in 2 separate podcasts. One in episode 19, that was my pick. It was a very early episode, and it was a mixed review, certainly. Also, the only one that John was absent for. And then we reviewed again at the behest of Tony Catalano, our writer, in fairly recently, actually, episode 131. And there's a lot to be had in Flying Lotus's work. I mean, he's the guy that really sits almost completely in electronica. But, of course, Damon Albarn has that side of him. He usually doesn't sit there entirely. I mean, there's a lot that goes on with Damon Albarn. But at the same time, when he attempts doing that, I kind of want more of it. And I don't, you gotta believe in your project. You gotta at least stick with one thing, or at least go off the natural development of it. And I feel a little bit repetitive in saying this because we've had this several times in the album before. Again, I want to stress, I don't think that these sections are divorced in any way. But the very beginning here, it strikes me as very dissonant synthstrumental. It's so dissonant. I don't know. I wanted more of it. That's about all I could say for it. I love the synth overlaps. I love these little pitch bends in between. And then suddenly we just go AWOL into a much more live style, to the beginning, a more live style drum and guitar riff. Again, it's this class of texture that could sound natural to a lot of people, but to me it feels like a choice to abandon exploration. John said earlier while we were listening, he was like, it sounds weird, safe. weird, safe. And that's essentially exactly how I feel with this. I mean, it's not that it's not matched up. It's not that it doesn't feel like a development, but it's not exploratory.
It's almost... I made another metaphor. It's akin to taking a classic rock song, something that is iconic from the 60s or 70s, running it through an 8-bit player, and then putting the two parts together. Yeah, when you 8-bit Smoke on the Water, you recognize it. When you really go tonal, you recognize it. But the two pieces never should meet. Not the original plus this weird amalgamation. You don't... Yeah, there's a melody. It's the same song, but it's two halves of a very different idea.
At the same point, I will say that the chorus is more matched in some sense with things that were earlier on the album. It's ridiculously punk, more punk than earlier examples to that effect. It's not that it doesn't really...
It's still skillful. It's still well put together, but
yeah.
I want him to stay at that fun, kitschy end.
I think, though, as a whole, and while I don't disagree with the points you're making, again, like I said in the beginning, I enjoyed the song. However, there isn't a ton of depth to it. Overall, it just doesn't really go anywhere except in these two distinct places, and it does feel a little repetitive. It didn't stop my enjoyment of it, but I can see where you guys are coming from.
It's kind of like peeking behind some shrubs, and you see El Dorado, and then all of a sudden you just decide, no, let's not go. Let's just play in this clearing over here, which is very, very boring. Or this playground that's right behind us. But there's El Dorado, but we're going to play over here. Well, that's a practical choice because there's space over here and it's a playground, and you don't know what's in El Dorado. Who knows? Maybe it's scary. Makes sense, but it makes it for a pretty lame journal entry.
Okay. The next track is probably my favorite track on the album. Track 7, My Terracotta Heart, which I like the imagery just because terracotta, I think of a terracotta pot and like a clay pot, and I don't know, like a heart is fragile like a clay pot.
Yeah, get in.
Combinations.
It's a pretty thing.
The whole overall song has this is one of the strongest emotional tracks on the record. It's got a sweet sadness from the start, and it's got this synth backing that comes in right away. It's really mellow, and it really kind of eases you into this kind of lull of sweet kind of...
It's just...
somberness.
Nah, I would almost
Sweet
say...
kind of sweetery.
No, sultry. Almost sultry. It's not quite
That's not
there.
sweet at all.
Yeah, I don't think it was sultry.
No.
That's the
It
opposite.
had a little bit of attitude to it. I loved it. It was smooth. Once again, he does smooth, Teflon smooth.
Well, it's in the drums here. I mean, it's really just like this clapping sound. Maybe a couple other beat work in the background, maybe a tambourine. But the riff itself is sort of provided by an almost more keyboard-sounding guitar. Mm-hmm. And then there's, I think, an additional comping instrument, or actually an additional comping guitar that you would hear in the right ear. But yeah, the vocals are back to its more smooth, crooning style. It's not punk anymore.
And the most epic part of this song, the bass. Once again, it's talking. Walking and talking, going up and down. It's my favorite part of the song.
I really like when it walks and talks.
I love, because he doesn't just make it walk. He doesn't just play around with it. He uses it to actually show things.
Well,
to really bring it to a forefront.
In the verses here, it's used more for accents, and frankly, at that point, it really wasn't the most interesting thing to me. Instead, there were these strings that would step in.
Mm-hmm.
It struck me as more like synth strings, but they were interruptions. And this is kind of like what he did earlier in the album. These oddball interruptions that step in at very odd times, like in this case, like on the 2 and, halfway through the second beat, all of a sudden they step in and then they leave. They leave at an odd time too, like the 4 and or something like that. And it's weird to have such a very grand and dare I say epic flourish, just popping in to say hi and then leaving like normal. I appreciate that, frankly. I appreciate that he's sort of playing around with expectation.
It gives an interesting structure. I also want to focus on the lyrics for a moment because I really enjoy the chorus of this song, or not chorus, but like I guess it's the chorus. It's hard to tell.
It's sort of like home base.
I'm running out of heart today. I'm running out of open road to you. When I know you are emoting, you're dazed. Is something broke inside you? Because at the moment, I'm lost in feeling that I don't know if I'm losing you again.
And there's actually an answer to that later on, which I find even more interesting. The fact that he just plays around with the tense instead of running out of heart. I was running out of heart that day.
Yeah.
I was running out of open road to you. And I know I was emoted. I was dazed. All of a sudden, everything is past tense, and he's convincing himself of this stronger. I pretty much love everything he's doing lyrically here. And also, this does seem like the kind of track that's just a little bit more consistent than a lot of the other tracks that we've cited lately. There really is no section that I feel is unfulfilled in a way.
Yeah.
It just feels like a solid track, and everything is linked together, and it feels like he delivered upon his promises in a sense.
The progress of this track is very much in line with what we expected, but the expectations were met in a good way.
And it takes its time. That's the other thing. It doesn't just jump into any one of these specific elements. It doesn't try to speed through it. It doesn't try to get to the culmination too quickly. It's a track that really just builds over the whole piece, as opposed to sectionally.
And also, just to harken back to the bass, which you mentioned earlier.
Lovely bass.
In the chorus is really where it steps out, and that's where it's strongest. It seems a lot more free-forming at this point, and it's an independent character there. I really enjoyed that. And also, there's some little harkings back to early in the album. I noticed there was a transition here where he brings back in the Sirens that were there in like the 10-second introduction to the first track, and I don't know. There's connectivity that I feel like is being renewed at this point.
I also really like the way the track winds down. It doesn't, it's not a sharp ending or a curveball transition. It's just it winds down to a vocal outro that kind of just culminates, and it really bookends the emotiveness in this track.
I'll even admit that the electric guitar was not just there, it actually was strong as both a comping instrument and a solo instrument. If I had any critiques, I would just say that there seems to be a lot more devotion in the chorus. I really, really adore that whole part. I'm running out of heart today. There's just deliberation with that section.
Strong lyrics and strong delivery, for sure.
Yeah. Alright, so let's go to track 8. There Are Too Many of Us.
So this is the single. This is the first track I heard from the record before I listened to the whole thing. It has a music video on YouTube that's kind of stripped down, just a performance video with some interesting visual aesthetics for the framing. Nothing really worth mentioning beyond that.
As plain as I can see, it's a social statement.
Yeah, this is a Muse track, sort of.
Muse track only in the way that Muse tended to have lots of social statements, and their album, The Second Law, which we reviewed as early as episode 16, was full of them.
The thing about this song that I really like is from the moment it starts, the instrumentation breeds drama. It's definitely a social statement song, and the structure of the music gives you that feel.
The marching style was, well, you take that, you add in the radio, or in this case it came off more as like a megaphone vocal work. It's safe putting these two things together, especially when you deliver a message type of a song. It's not something I kind of was expecting from Blur. Not because it's unheard of, but this felt a little bit cliche because he's just taking, well, very familiar elements and putting them together to do something I've been listening to almost my whole life.
You know social statement tracks, and here's the thing, I have a tendency to avoid them in most cases. Nevertheless, I was a little more defensive of this track. First of all, because it was really one of a kind on this album, and I think that concept, obviously it's not beat around the concept, there are too many of us. I don't think you can be more on the nose than that. Frankly, you barely even need to read the lyrics to get to the bottom of that statement. It's really just, I appreciate the irony here, with the military drum pattern, but then what presides over that is almost more interesting. The strings step in here and kind of add this, again, I hate to say it, but faux, epic overlire to this track. They bow on the beat, on the beat, every beat, and they sound almost like a larger ensemble stepping in here to evoke the theme. But it sounds, again, a little bit fake, could be synth strings, or maybe the raw sound was just cut back in post. Still, it fits with this style. Frankly, I was intrigued by those chord changes, even though it is just a four chord song. They're very beautiful, very enticing chords, the slight little dissonances that make you think. I heard more of an E sus6, followed by a G major, followed by a B minor 7. That was a really nice motion. Also back up to the E minor 7, and then to A minor 9th. That was very beautiful, and then on to B minor 7. I appreciated all of this. I think that it was a really nice round to keep the song going. It made the point seem pivotal, and that's the most important thing, is when you can actually convey any kind of social statement in such a way that you feel it's a little bit imperative. Well, how much more imperative can you get than there are too many of us? That's plain to see. We all believe in praying for our immortality. We pose this question to our children that cause them all to stray and live in tiny houses of the same mistakes we make. So, in short, the concept that we really do nothing to stop the inevitability of there being an overpopulation problem on this planet.
Or any other mistake.
What do you friggin' do? Okay, I get it. It's an old statement. Everybody knows that it's going to be a problem. And frankly, I'm more of an optimist. I'm a cynic and everything else, but I'm more of an optimist when it comes to the direction of our society. I actually do think that we will overcome these problems if we apply ourselves. Nevertheless, it's still a pointed idea.
But my big issue is it's predictable. This song in and of itself, for me, I know when he's going to go into a next section and introduce these elements. Where's the chaos from before? Where's the off-tempo, off-key? Yeah, but that's what I was really liking with this album.
Yeah, I feel I'm
missing it here.
See, but I feel like taking a step back here from it and creating something that's a solid single, that's a little bit predictable, but still within a strong and manicured structure, really adds a relatability to the track.
But it draws away from the arc, from the more esoteric nature he was building throughout this album. It draws away from the album as a whole because, well, a lot of the iconic elements that we're looking for, I was looking for, that I would come to expect in this album, are gone.
Well, see, I think you're overlooking the fact that there's a little bit of comedy that's in here also, in just the gall that he would have to title a track. There are too many of us. It reminds me of a Bill Burr joke, obviously the comedian who had a whole bit on the concept that, in a democracy, no one has the balls to elect a president that would just say in his running and in his speeches, trying to get the position, sorry, 80% of you got to go. No one's going to say that, But yet he's saying it here, and it almost made me think of an older example to that effect. One of the most popular cases of satire, and that was Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, which was based around the concept that, how are we going to solve poverty and overpopulation over there in Ireland? Well, we should eat children. They have a lot of protein. And it was just, a whole statement on that, and he elaborates. You think it's going to be like a quick quip. No, it's an entire essay on the subject. Taken very self-serious, but clearly not. And I think that that's a little bit of the idea here. And I think that there's like a contrast between like this imperative, string swoop. He hasn't done anything like this in the album. Why should he choose the time to do it now? I think there's just a slight little bit of comedy there. I believe he's serious about the concept, but I think you're meant to take it in stride. Hence, this is a social statement song that I could kind of I can relate to in a way and enjoy.
And I'm not saying I dislike this song. I like the song as a whole. I like every little thing he does in here. But for me, nothing was quite great. Was even really quite that good.
I think there are moments where it gets better. Like, for instance, there's moments in the third verse here where it even seems to get more imperative on top of...
It goes from marching to a galloping kind of
Exactly.
Yeah, and
I had less of a problem
it.
with the build here, too. Normally I would think, he's just sort of like, tacking it on, trying to reach it to a plateau, but I didn't feel like this was robbing the track of anything because it never felt mystical to me from the outset, just like earlier examples in this album. Instead, this song had a statement from the get-go. It was one thing from the start, and so I figured, all right, go ahead. Grow. Just enhance. Do your rock thing. That's what rock social statement songs do, at least. It enhances the element.
Okay.
I mean, I can't disagree with where you're sitting with it, John. Or I can disagree with it. I can understand it, though. I just feel like the militant sound and
the song itself was good. It really was good. I like it. I just have to point out the flaw as a part of the album, as I see it.
I believe there is just more cleverness than you're giving it for the fact that the music is serving to take the role of the sarcasm that perhaps Jonathan Swift had used in his quips.
And which also does tether it to the record. Also, the next track just in title alone kind of adds a little bit of comedy to the album. So the next track is called Ghost Ship, What do you think of a ghost ship? You think of the really terrible horror movie.
No, I don't. I think of
No, that's exact.
I think of classic pirate ship tales.
So
No, Matt called it. I think of that horror movie.
you think of really haunted, disturbing things. What do we get? An island beachy cruise kind of sound. So
We're back to
clearly, here's the gag. The lyrics reflect the title, and they are depressing, but the structure of the song is the happy-go-lucky, islandy kind of vacation-y groove. And I think that alone, that dichotomy from the title to the music, a little on the nose, but I think it's funny.
My comments on this track are somewhat thinner, especially considering my overly elaborate defense of the previous. I think that the bass here drives the groove, and that's the best part. The drum, though, is utilitarian. The drums themselves are utilitarian, and then the guitars kind of remind me of a watered-down cake.
I mean,
and I like cake, but, you know, you take too much out of it.
But wet cake is disgusting.
Yeah, you have a mushy cake.
Well,
that's what I have here. With
I
Ghost Ship.
thought we meant like a zip drive that got
Soggy.
wet you can't use anymore or something like that, because it's cake, so they would have been there in the zip drive. Anyway, back on topic. It's everything a nice cruise groove song would be, but I love the dissonance between that and the actual content of the lyrics.
Yeah.
Because even the vocals match that groovy cruise song. But I remember flashbacks lighting up magic waves. 8 o'clock, saloon emptiness, handle it. The wide old image I had to view 11 seconds ago. I didn't say MG, so you will never know. But then he goes with, I got away for a little while, but then it came back much harder. The way he delivers that line, it's almost... I almost would say it's getting away from an addiction and going back to it. It's a little creepy, but if you're not listening to the words, it still is a nice, safe song.
Yeah.
I also felt like as of the chorus, and from there to the end of the song, actually for successive verses, he picked up his own register. He went up an octave or something. He's not quite in falsetto, but he's clearly up there. And it actually kind of helped out the song a little bit. He sticks with that register just for the rest of the song, and I thought that was an interesting choice. It kind of ramps up the energy of this, because he's got a lot of soul in his upper register.
And also, I think that it's unavoidable that the song did overall kind of have a simple and predictive direction. But again, I think it's these other elements that made it enjoyable for me and kind of added to the track.
The music itself is very jam-like, very unoffensive, and that's better. And frankly, the only other part of this that I really liked was that chromatic shift, right between certain phrases. Specifically, right when he says "right race," and also "hold home, come, it's the last ride." So right there, home, come. It's the last ride, boarding here tonight out in the bay. I need aligned a new shiner, right race. And right there, it's just this, I love this little chord transition. It just uses this little passing note, passing chord in this case, and it's, it was astute, minute as it may be.
Fair enough.
Astute though minute.
Also, something odd to note that I only noticed because I was staring at Spotify as we listened to the record. For whatever reason, there's about 9 to 10 seconds of silence at the end of the track. The song ends, there's silence, and then the next song begins. It could be a production error. However, I feel like it's not. I'm sure there's an intention behind it.
Well,
so I feel like it's worth mentioning at least.
Living out a body here, what can I do? It's up to the doc every day to join here with you. I had to get away for a little while, but then it came back much harder. This is a bit of an outer-body experience here, perhaps even hinting at death itself.
So maybe that's what the silence is supposed to represent.
It is
That's
ghost
clever.
ship. It is ghost ship.
I gotta admit, I'm a little scared with the it's up to the doc every day to join here with you. Like, his health is hinging on, some doctor's advice. Again, that may be reading too closely into it, but I don't know.
Well, it could be a double
evocative.
entendre. Dock itself could be the dock of the ship
That
as
too.
well. And the fact that he has to come into the bay every day to meet up with her, sort of like a, lighthouse, foghorn metaphor thing going on there.
You mean the ship's doctor?
No,
You mean
the dock itself. She has to come
No,
back
but
to
it's
the dock.
not spelt like that, though.
Well, it may be spelt like
like
that. We can't see the words coming out of his mouth.
D-O-C.
It might be D-O-C-K.
Or maybe A to Z lyrics got it wrong. And then you're right.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time.
From here we go to track 10, which is Pyongyang. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, that's correct. It's the
Excellent.
capital of North Korea, for the reference.
The song starts with this kind of bell intro. I think, was it a triangle or was it just like chimes? I couldn't really tell.
I couldn't quite pin it down, but it was certainly haunting.
Yeah, it was definitely some kind of chime, and this, I think, is related to the previous track, a connecting piece. This kind of haunting chime definitely links the tracks together. It builds into an oddly haunting kind of bizarro kind of sound with odd sound bites here before the bass kicks in.
It's haunting for a couple of reasons. First of all, this very low, like almost inaudible synth that it's rumbling in the background.
It's like a drone.
Yeah, but it's almost like the kind of drone that like a stereo would make when it's not really playing anything. Like it's just that natural, electric hum. But in addition to that, it steps in with these, I could only call them like really lazy guitar bends that step in here very sparsely, and with the tone that they have to them, it strikes me as very like 90s avant-garde metal if taken alone by itself. It's not really metal in context of everything else, but that's how they sound just independently. And then that's also complemented by these great little like bass pops. Again, bass is one of the best things about this album. I just love the way it reacts to everything. It's a thoroughly reacting instrument. It's not just there. But, the chord changes themselves are just very, very monotonous. But then again, if you want to do haunting right, it should probably be a little numbing.
So we got weird. We got mystical, mythic, what have you. And we've got different from previous tracks. Immediately my mind went to do something with it. And we get to the more chorus-oriented music work.
The chorus
and,
was not a plus.
Oh my gosh. It fit. It was one of those places, it's melody, it's perfect.
But like earlier, it's another generic, safe shift. The synth just starts holding in the background, and all of a sudden it just starts sounding this very, like, pop, warm, the awkward guitar, like, almost ushers the verse back in an awkward fashion. That is to say, like, the lazy guitar bends, just, like, awkwardly bring the verse back in. It was actually the only transition on the album that I felt like it was a little bit poor.
It's just structurally the whole song goes from the quirky, odd moments to something completely generic and expected, and we've seen that before. And
Not completely. See, it's still good quality piecemeal. It's still good guitar work. Some of it, like the bass. Bass tends to be great throughout the album. I'm just getting tired of going from, ooh, great idea. Ooh, that's the same thing I heard 15 years ago. I'm tired of this.
Well, on the plus side, I believe this is the writings of a political prisoner.
Oh?
Yeah, it's...
I look down from my window to the island where I'm held. Listen while you're sleeping. Darkness is itself. Tomorrow I am disappearing, 'cause the trees are amplified. Never-ending broadcasts to which I do not aspire. Kid, the mausoleum has fallen, and the perfect avenues will seem empty without you, and the pink light that bathed the great leaders is fading. By the time your sun is rising there, out here it's turning blue. The silver rockets coming, and the cherry trees of Pyongyang, I'm leaving.
So it sounds like
Or
someone
rather,
who is
someone
locked
who
up.
has locked up, decided to escape locked up in his mind, or I don't know.
It's
Or
someone
could-
locked up in Pyongyang, is what it sounds like.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
well, it comes off with sort of like watching a death knell of the great leader, or whatever they call him, Kim
Yeah.
Jong-un or Kim Jong-il, whatever it's based upon, or just the whole concept of what North Korea actually is.
There is definitely a narrative here to this song.
Kim Il-sung.
It's interesting. It's
Kim Il-sung, then Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un.
Well, it depends. I don't know. It doesn't really matter which one of them. They kind of have the same tyrannical government that's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. But we're not a political discussion group.
But
we're a
subtly
music...
different haircuts.
Subtly.
Subtly.
It's almost like they grandfathered in the barber or something like that. But it's close
Yeah,
enough.
wow. That barber's...
Back to the point at hand. This track overall, though, like I said, it's not bad. It's just...
It's a nice story, but I don't know like what's going on otherwise.
It just seemed a little out of left field a bit.
He's got statements.
Yeah.
It could have been a great story if the chorus, the kid in the museum, kid in the mausoleum part, not museum, had something going on there that was really maybe more dramatic, maybe something that would really point to what's going on there, but nothing really comes off as drama.
I agree. Unfortunately, if we had problems with this song, the next song is worse. So, for the first time on the entire album, Ong Ong, O-N-G, O-N-G, track 11, This is the ubiquitously boring, generic, expected, disappointed, cliche filler track.
No. A little too much description right there. Or maybe not even enough, because we start off with la la la's. I mean, there's that.
Like, what upsets me about this song is that every band not every band, a lot of bands have gone the predictable route before. They'll dip into it for a song here, do a filler there, whatever. But this seems so out of characteristic of the album. The only reason I disagree with you about before, when you were saying the track 8 was uncharacteristic, is because they were at least making a statement. They were doing something.
There was something there.
This had no place on this record. It just felt completely out of place musically, vocally, structurally, and I've run out of things.
Lyrically.
Well, it's
Lyrically.
Yeah.
Also, in terms of placement, like, I mean, to think what it followed, I mean, as much as we may criticize the last track, actually, I think he was painting a very, very vivid picture.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I thought there was a lot of...
Story was great. Story was great.
The story was great. There's a lot of beauty in there. I mean, just the concept of envisioning someone in that position. There's a lot to be said about North Korea and the fact that he even attempted so, out of place as it may be. I gotta hand it to him. And the horror-filled style of it, I think... Like, I don't know. I see myself as, like, the last day before I'm about to be executed, essentially. Yeah. Or, again, I'm not sure whether it's executed or about to escape. And then from this segue, ong, la 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 la. Like, it's just a lot of... I got a boat on a sunny day to get out of this town because the tarmac was melting and the people seemed to sway stuck in the underground.
I mean, this could be the escape song that's paired up with the previous track, but I just feel like
he arrived?
Well, I mean, it could be that he got out. I mean, but also I feel like
track
10...
I don't know whether I'm leaving means escape or whether he got killed.
Oh, that could be it too. This could be like a heaven fantasy, which is why it's so cheery and predictable and bright.
I would just say, to sum the whole thing up... It could
be argued that even like a citizen in North Korea is a political prisoner.
To sum it all up, it's just a nice, easygoing track. And in this case, I'm not even... all the ideas that I said earlier, that it was still well put together. There were still great bass, guitar, drums when I didn't really want them. They were still good.
Yeah.
No, not right here. This one feels a little phoned in. There's really nothing going on. I'm being drawn to.
I just feel like track 10 would have been better served having track 12 follow it. Track 11 just doesn't add or take away anything. It's just kind of there. It's the ultimate definition of filler. If you can take the track out or leave it and nothing changes, I mean, that's the problem.
Well, the lyrics may hint at like certain other things. The music doesn't match it in the slightest. Frankly, this is a grab your brother, sing Kumbaya kind of track. There's just everybody sing along, you know. It's lots of oohs, lots of na-nas, lots of ahs, lots of la-la-las, and I don't know. It's really hard to even peer into the content here. If you're a land of the social and media feed, I want to be with you on an isle of rain clouds and verdant seas. I will be there with you. I don't know.
Could be a delusion, but based on the previous narrative. But I don't know.
There's not enough in this album so far for me to really start considering these things.
Yeah,
you know,
this wasn't a concept album, so yeah, going from track to track, trying to find a concept there seems odd.
Well,
I'm not saying there aren't like theory. Yeah, there's theories.
I have a theory going on here.
You want to say it now? You might as well go for it.
Okay, well, before we go into the final track, Mirror Ball, this is sort of, and from the way I'm viewing this album, it's coming off to me as a identity crisis. There's a lot going on here, spoken from the first-person point of view, that seems to be a character being pulled left, right, center, doesn't know what they're doing, having to deal with both how they view themselves and how they view the relationships. There's a lot going on for that identity crisis going on here.
There does seem to be a lot of clash between innocence on this album and also just the scary other side of the tracks. And he pursues that through a quite diverse range of avenues.
And track 12 is also diverse. As John said, the name is Mirror Ball. This we get a slow-trotting, Western-esque kind of song. This is definitely something we've seen before. Steve makes an interesting point. We see it a lot. It might not be because it's popular in modern music and mostly just the bands we choose. It's popular with them.
Well, it's not by our choice.
But that's...
But there's usually one of these tracks, like on albums every so often. Yeah, just they like Western. I don't know. I guess everything comes back every once in a while, and everyone wants to do this track in the vein of like a Clint Eastwood narrative, so to speak. And so, in we go with that Western style. I don't even know if it could be called quintessentially like Western style music. I don't
kind
even
of
know
like
what to
spaghetti
call
Western, maybe.
Sure.
And the weird part is this spaghetti Western sort of piece, I think, is talking about an MMORPG or something similar. Because there's a couple of oddball references in the lyrics. With lines like, I remember the flying dragons too, I was there with you. So before you log out, hold close to me, hold close to me. And then, I think I found you in the temple square under the wishing tree. A lot of these references are just like...
to a video game of some kind.
It's weird to
almost
have
like
this.
an illusion.
And then, once again, speaking to my identity crisis theory, the fact that this person is so honed in on to go and say, I cried my eyes out, hold close to me, hold close to me. And to end, I cried my eyes out, hold close to me, over and over again. It's sort of like he's a little bit too much investment in this virtual world that he's delved into. He's a little bit too deep into there and lost the person he was playing with. I don't know. It's weird.
I mean, the identity crisis theory is not that unfounded. I mean, something I wanted to talk about after this that I was kind of mulling on as we talked about it is Damon Albarn could be having an identity crisis, considering he's in 3 now very specific projects, his own solo one, Blur, and the Gorillaz. This album could reflect that identity crisis he's been going through. And is it hard to keep your own personal identity when you're a multiple band man? Talk about the solo man band, but the multiple band man could be an identity issue. Anyway, I think that's
but
not...
of course he brings that in with, like, social issues, so, I mean, there's a line between personal ongoings and what's happening in society.
Well, there are too many of us, a little bit of an oddball, but it's also from the point of view of someone on a pulpit kind of a thing going on there.
So it's still
them
centered around
dealing
the
with
person.
something. It's still centered around, it's still very much a first-person point of view, or an inclusive multiple people, but still first-person point of view.
First-person point of view, but a lot of it is external and a lot of it is internal.
And there's a semantics to be argued there, but anyway.
Before we wrap up, I do want to mention, of course, though, that this track does wind down the album, which, we've had plenty of albums do that. But what I do like is that the string work in here, like in other tracks before, it was very nice. I think it adds to the track. It kind of solidified that Western feel and kind of wrapped up the whole album, conclusion-wise, pretty neatly.
Sure. Yeah, no, I make no pretense at hiding the fact that this is really not a great outro for me. But yeah, of course, the double stop slides, when strings do that, I'm always enlightened. And I think they were well done. Again, he's a great composer. What can I say?
So who's going to start? Because it ain't going to be me.
Well, it's not me, it's my pick. That's how that
Steve,
works.
thanks for volunteering.
Sure. Glad I could help. All right. This is definitely the kind of album that I think... I'm sorry to say, I think it put a lot of its heavier material in the front. Musical material, that is. And I think actually, as you listen on, and especially if you're reading on along with it, or if you're really honing in the lyrics themselves, I think that the themes will start to reveal themselves to you later. That's usually the case with albums. Again, I think it's very, very rare that people listen to music and just sort of like, all right, yeah, I know the theme after, like, first track, and they're actively thinking about that as you go. No. Instead, it's just, yeah, come on, enjoy the music. In that case, it's helpful that he stuck the more musically challenging stuff in the beginning, or at least revealed all the types of things that he might do later. Unfortunately, it seems like he comes to do, like, lesser versions of them as the tracks go on. It's like the soothing beach-style stuff, as we've cited probably in over 5 tracks. That's strong even as early as the second track. But you can't really put your finger on it and say, like, I'm at the beach. It's not that... It's not made for idiots. Instead, it's an environment that he created that we just develop impressions off of. Later on, it becomes far more in the nose. And it seems as if he's just like, nah, I'm going to live here now. Those are those tracks. And then there are the other tracks in which he broaches very experimental electronic work. I appreciate that. There's not too many of those. But again, he's a fluid composer. He knows how to link that with instruments that are a little bit more grounded, a little bit more acoustic. And I thought that was expertly done. I think in general, I find this to be a very unoffensive album. And I'm not saying that as as critically, I think, as a lot of people would use that word. I think this album is, if you want to be challenged by it, then listen in, and listen really closely. Then there are some challenging moments, but they're not all at once. And then there's also the fact that sometimes I feel like there's a split between as we cited many times, usually as a fault, the split between the safe and the split between the experimental. Even if you're not talking about specifics such as genre, if it's just those two tiers
in the same song,
it seems
in the same song is the key.
In the same song, in many songs, it seems intentional to me, and that's why I'm a little confused about that goal. And the identity crisis would fit that, but it's not like I need things spelled out for me here. But there's not enough meat to go along with this. I feel like it's just impression after impression, disguised by, or rather under the guise of just, it's a smooth listen. And maybe that's really what he wants in the end. If he has that many projects going on, I have a feeling that maybe Blur at this point is his chance to just sort of like, all right, I'm going to have fun. Because he really laid on a pretty thick social statement with his most recent solo album, which was Everyday Robots, and that was all about nature versus technology, almost through and through. This is vaguer, and it's more about the music. I just wish the music could really speak for that as he goes. It just seems like that stuff was pushed to the front, and once you get the hang of it, once you get the gist of it, that's pretty much it. He has plateaued. One of my favorite moments, as I'm sorry to say, was in that transition or bridge, as I see it, in the very, very first track, and then a couple of others. Certainly, There Are Too Many of Us, and certainly Thought I Was a Spaceman. I mean, this is where he's at as far as texture is concerned, and that's what I'm all about with him. He's such a master at texture. I wish that was just the whole gamut. So, I think this probably rests around a good album, but I think there's a cohesion that is just missing a little bit. I'm going to put this at a 3.9.
I'm in the same ballpark. There's very little I can really add to what you said, but the one thing I want to point out, I like the stories that are going on here. I don't think we read all the lyrics from all the songs. We actually skipped a few songs. But his vocal work is great, and I don't think we can stress that enough. His bass work is great, and I don't think we can stress that enough. Blur, as a band, does a lot of really quality things. The story, another quality aspect of here. I like all the little elements that are going on here. Even the quote-unquote phoned-in aspects of some of the choruses that feel like, I wish they'd gone further, but hey, it's still good. I still like it. But it's not enough. There's nothing here that I really love. There's not a lot that I'm connecting with on a very evocative or emotional level. So I'm going to be a little bit harsher than Steve. It's a really, really good album, but that still is going to keep it shy of the 4 range, so 3.75. No, 3.8. I'm going to break my own rule of doing quarters, but 3.8. It's nearing, but it's really just not there for me.
Okay. I think both of you are being a little overly harsh. Not really harsh. I think just a little overly harsh. A speck. And here's why for me.
For reference, I rated his album, that is his solo album, I believe a 4.3,
Yeah.
Because there was cohesion in different elements.
I rated that one a 4.4. This record, for me, first of all, I'm so excited to have a new Blur record, so let's put that out there. As a fan,
that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. As a fan, I'm glad they're back from their 12-year gap of new music, and I'm excited to hope that they continue to make albums, that they don't break up again, and that they stay together. I do want to clarify, there was a lot of he's thrown around. This is a 4-person band, and though he's probably doing a lot of the mixing, Damon Albarn, he is only the guitarist and the singer. This is a full band. So he's not the end-all, be-all as far as production. I'm sure there's input from the whole band. That said, there's only one song I really didn't love, and that was Ong Ong, which I didn't hate, I was just kind of meh about. But everything else I either enjoyed or loved. Emotionally, there are some gaps. Not every track rings with true emotion, but that's fine. You don't need that in every track. However, I will agree with Steve on the blanket statement that this does fall short of his solo record. If we're comparing Damon Albarn's direct work, but this is also not Damon Albarn. This is a collective effort by Blur that I still think is a good direction. And even though the exploration of some of those tracks fell short, I liked where it was going. I just wished it kept going. But I don't think this is closer to the average end. I don't. Because we've reviewed a lot of average pop, and this is bounds better, except in very specific moments where it goes safe. But all in all, there's still a technique and a talent that is here, and that is honed, and that is specifically very much Damon. And his band Blur. Like, I just truly enjoy Blur, and I'm so grateful that they have a new record. I could go at length about the stuff that they've already mentioned, but they've already mentioned it, so I'm not going to mention it again. I will, however, say that I think that this does sit above a 4, but not much. Because, again, I loved his solo record so much more, because it was something different. This did fall into some samey traps. So for me, it's a 4.1. Not quite a 4.25 or approaching that, but it's definitely above a 4. I think that Blur as a band have come a long way. This is definitely unique from their older stuff. It's definitely not a catchy, poppy song like Song 2 was. There is exploration, there's expanding, and he's maybe pulled in some of his solo stuff and Gorillaz stuff to add to it, or this might have already existed within the band dynamic. But I like the way the Blur has gone based on his discography and within the frame of music. They're not a 90s band that sounds 90s anymore. There are moments, but they have grown beyond that.
I'll only point out that because you made the point that, this is Blur, this is not Damon Albarn. You had also, I think, made the point earlier that, you had heard the Gorillaz influence in this, based on what he's done with Gorillaz. Now, having, going back to Blur, you're bound to see his stuff stepping in here. Yeah. And that's why I just want to clarify what I said about, texture being one of my favorite things about this. It also goes back to it being some of the problem. I don't think it can fix all of the content here. I think that overwhelmingly we look at that as the most positive thing, the texture in this album and all the stuff that enters in. But from even earlier on, I noticed that there was that case of it being not clutter necessarily, but just putting stuff in the way to mask the content. And I feel like that's the main problem here. Instead of it being a fluid part of the composition, like it is in cases in this album, I think in general, the content was just a little bit scarce here. And no amount of like, hey, look at this, and look at this. I don't know. I don't think that quite breaches the 4 territory to me. Still, there's a lot here. The moments themselves, also, those moments, those signature, standoutish moments were a little bit few and far between. I know he's got it. That's the only reason. I can't put it over the mark, because I know he's got it as a musician.
But like what I was hinting at before, I think it's really interesting that Damon, going from band to band, brings influences from each band to the others. I mean, obviously instrumentation, the core rock and roll instrumentation of the Gorillaz is influenced by Blur. Blur's hip-hop and synth-related stuff is definitely influenced by the Gorillaz. And also Damon's solo kind of is a mesh of both. I think that something that's interesting about an artist who's in multiple projects is there's bleed over. I feel like if you're learning and growing, you're not going to just keep those 3 elements, in this case, specifically talking about him, but in general, you're not going to keep the specific elements separate. You're going to want that mix. You're going to want to show your influence and how you're growing.
Right, well, it's a question of how much you can separate yourself, if indeed your goal is to separate yourself from yourself. This is a little different as opposed to our discussion we had on artists going solo, which of course want to do that to, explore what else they can do solo.
Sure.
But what about when you actually do set out to not just do what you do solo, be that whatever you want it to be, and then also whatever you want your band to be, and perhaps your other band or your other duo project. I mean, a lot of times artists do this in order to be as broad as possible, because they know branding, and they know that branding is important. When people have identified your sound as, whether it's your artist sound or your band sound, as a certain thing, then to just make the discographical choice to release a new album and just say, hey, you know what, well, I'm a rock musician, but I guess I want to do jazz right now, right? If that's under the same name, people are going to get a little bit confused. They're going to be like, well, this is not what I've been buying. Why did I buy this? Granted, of course, now with previews, they can get this ahead of time, but it's still a little bit strange because, you know, building your brand is kind of important. There's a lot of stuff that attaches to it. There's image that attaches it. There's identity. There's the type of things that you're going to be mentioning, and it'll distract people from you, as strange as that sounds. Hence, you know, if you can make that conscious shift to say pursue another genre, even if it's just like a minor genre shift or a minor style shift with somebody else, then that's a wise decision to make. But I guess your question is how well can they do it and how well is it typically done?
And then there's the other way around. A lot of times a musician will leave or parts of a band will break up, and you're gonna have somebody who's sees one band going one way and wants to do something completely different, wants to stay what it is. Or like 3-time Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee Eric Clapton, he was doing the Yardbirds. Everybody forgets he was in the Yardbirds, or people who should know he's in the Yardbirds forget. He then goes on to make Cream, and then he goes on to do his solo career 3 times, inducted 3 times for 3 different projects, and each of them was very distinct. Cream was more along the lines of, you know, White Room, Sunshine of Your Love, like the really hard-hitting rock and roll Clapton loved doing. While Yardbirds ended up being kind of a pop rock kind of a sound by the end of the career that Eric was in with it. And then when he does on his solo stuff, I mean, it's really very pared down, very much a man and guitar kind of work orientation. Very 3 distinct ideas, but you always hear Clapton when you're looking for it.
Right, and that's similar to in the vein of Jack White, who we've had his album on the podcast. White Stripes, Jack White, The Racketeers, these are all bands that don't sound that different. They have differences, but he's definitely pulling his influence and what he's learned from band to band. The White Stripes being the most stripped down of all of them. It was the first band, and then as he built these other bands and careers, kind of brought those influences along for the ride. I think that the only fear I would have as an artist is if I make Blur sound too Gorillaz-y, then is it really Blur anymore? Obviously, you have those band members, whereas the Gorillaz is all post-production, all, you know, with collaborations, but it's all post-production. Blur is a band. Band has influence and opinions and stuff like that.
But as the front man, he calls a lot of shots, I'm sure.
Probably. I think that what's interesting about these artists and looking at it is it's more the idea of, we talked about going solo. So Rob Thomas went solo for Matchbox 20. But what about when Rob Thomas went back to Matchbox 20 and they released several records together again? What was the difference? What did he learn? What did he bring back? You know, Rob Thomas's solo stuff was more pop oriented, but Matchbox 20 has also kind of gone in a pop direction. Is that because he went solo and saw that the value of that?
The concept that, of course, you can't erase what you've learned. You can't unlearn something. So when you go back and say, all right, I'm going to re-immerse myself in this, it's not exactly like going back through time. Instead, you're a new human being, really, or just a developed human being trying to revisit the same people, the same project. It's like trying to catch up with an old friend, and I mean like a really old friend, someone you haven't talked to in like 10 years, and expecting it to be exactly the same. If you're lucky, if you had a good dynamic, maybe it will be, but I think more often not, it's going to be like, so we don't really know each other anymore, do we?
Well, a great example of that is Led Zeppelin. Ever since 1980, when Jimmy Page passed away, dissolved, fell apart, but every once in a while doing a one-off show. It's still not the same Jimmy Page, and I bring that up because he was also a Yardbird, and if you want to look at Yardbirds, Led Zeppelin, another big difference between the actual music being produced. Jimmy Page, another one of those guys that kind of crossed, not genre, but subgenres, kind of working within the same realm, and another one of those that even growing up, I never knew there was the same guy playing instruments, the same guy singing in a lot of these crossover bands. It was very popular during the 70s. You don't see it so much anymore. Late 60s, early 70s, people aren't borrowing from one another, not just sounds, but musicians.
Not 100% true anymore. As is our friend, or my favorite musician, one of anyway, Dave Grohl, who is in bajillions of bands at this point. Let's just use a fake number, because why not? He is in a ton of bands. But the interesting thing is, there is that crossover, because the lead singer of Queens of the Stone Age is in them Crooked Vultures with him. Also, like, it's one of those things where Dave Grohl jumps from band to band or will sit in on projects. Like, he's the drummer for Queens of the Stone Age on most of their studio records, but doesn't go on tour with them. There's crossover in the modern rock scene, just not as apparent as it was then. But also, I feel like Dave Grohl is an artist who has pretty much honed a specific sound and has not changed that much from band to band. He is a great drummer, a great guitarist, a great singer.
It's his specific sound, but the band changes it.
Right.
That's the whole thing. And that's what's really great, because Grohl is an amazing musician. It's interesting hearing his specific style used in different subgenres and genres of music, and even styles of, just a band from album to album really does adapt.
Yeah.
It's fun, because for him, it's sort of like a flip for me. I can identify him. I can hear him. From Nirvana onward, I can hear where he is. But it's interesting really seeing him expand.
Well, and I guess also as an artist, he's a unique case because he doesn't have specific genres that make his influences stand out. His sound, his overall Dave Grohl sound, is influenced by everything he's learned. And he's made it a sound. He's got that Dave Grohl sound. And it's not like, whereas Albarn's got a little bit of hip-hop, a little bit of punk, a little bit of rock and roll, Dave Grohl is uniquely Dave Grohl in these bands, adding to with his specific pinpoint genre.
Well, what it
fusion.
sounds like is also as a result of, Nine Inch Nails essentially being him anyway.
Yeah.
It's just like all he did was just disguise his name. Really, there's no need to disguise at that point. If you've done solo work and you're just being a soloist in other instances, especially if people just identify your sound as your sound, then that's almost the exception to the rule. Or rather that's not the point that I think we're trying to get at. That's a case where an artist just delivers to the table what he is asked to deliver.
Yeah.
That's a sort of stronger cult of personality, I think. I think really the question here is there a drive, I think, to separate yourself from yourself, as you said at the outset, like change your personality depending upon who else you're with, because a lot of people are not born with like this one style or this one set of tastes. If you know an artist well enough, you can perhaps keenly seep into it and be like, all right, that's you. Dave Grohl seems to be that case, but I think a lot of artists have separate styles. Even just 2 weeks ago, we had the case of Steve Wilson, who was more of a he's a prog guy, but as we said, prog is a form. Prog is not really a genre per se. There was jazz in there. There were lots of other things. And he had been a jazz artist for a while. He took his opportunity as a soloist to go do that. But then his, Porcupine Tree was very prog, also tended to get very metal in their middle period. And it's just like, I feel like he works with so many people, and also, sometimes just doing shows with different artists will enhance your sounds. There are certain people that just as frontmen, as masterminds, they're constantly looking for ways to grow their sound. Hence, whenever they do another project or even just another album, they just see it as an opportunity to be like, all right, I'm going to do something different, because they purposefully don't want to be identified as, that Steve Wilson sound.
Which I think is fair, and ultimately there's no right or wrong answer. I think it's just how you do it, and we've mentioned many examples of how you can do it differently. But ultimately, if you're going back to a band that you left to create your own sound and then reform as a group, or just continuing to change your own solo sound, growth is important. Ultimately, this whole conversation based around growth and learning. You are never done learning or evolving. If you are, then why make music? And I think that all of these things that people grasp at to add to their repertoire, as they say, really will only help but educate and expand your horizons.
And then, of course, there's also the fact that a lot of times I think it's done unconsciously. I mean, I realize that there are definitely artists that make a concerted effort as they hop from project to project to immerse themselves in that project. And I give them a lot of credit, but sometimes it's just a networking tool. It's really just a matter to say, all right, well, I would like to work with you guys for a while, but I'm still going to continue being me. I'm not going to, completely adapt my mind for the project. I'm just going to do what I think feels right for this project, or reacting to whatever you're doing as another musician. In that case, I would say, hopping from project to project is really something, or the brand building, the brand idea is really more of a fan imposition. We identify them as something, whereas they were just trying to work with other people. And it was just a networking tool so that they could stay as broad as possible. But then identity is all in our heads. You know, it's just a circumstance and sequence of events stacked on top of each other that you can't really predict, just like you don't know who you're going to meet the next day.
Well, ultimately, you can't tell someone what their identity is. They tell you.
Yeah, well, yes.
Ultimately.
But yet, literature we incessantly try to define it.
Yeah.
Even on this podcast, we've fallen into that trap.
That's true. That's definitely true. All right, I think there's a good point for us to move on to our email of the week, or comment of the week. That's right, folks. We do not have a spam. We actually had a fan mail this week, which has an important relation to the episode it is remarked on.
That's right. This was just 3 weeks ago that we reviewed Wild Nothing's album, Nocturne, which was brought to us by Devin Jackson Mullen, who we had a very nice chat with, a nice review, and a nice interview. Well, family stepped in, and that was sweet to see. Bill Mullen, Devin's father, decided to comment on the very episode, flat out stating, "This is Devin's father. Really enjoyed the podcast. Yes, I did listen to the whole thing. Your deconstruction of the album was harrowing, ellipsis included. I'm glad I'm not a musician. Great work, Bill Mullen." I was glad to see that, especially
Kind words.
Yeah, kind words. Even if even the harrowing, it's a kind word.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't really set out to destroy artists, and I don't think he took it that way. But yet, nevertheless, I set the record straight. Thanks for listening, Mr. Mullen. Despite the harrowing experience, we're glad you enjoyed it. Indeed, art is a battle over thin lines, but whether harrowing, sobering, or enlightening, it's all worth it. Best of wishes to the artist's future endeavors. As for Devin, he was a pleasure to have on. His astute perspectives were a welcomed counterpoint, to say nothing of his music. I'm sure you're very proud. That was my little response.
I have this personal connection to when family members comment on, or friends of the guests or artists comment on.
Fun fact, my mother listened to the very same episode. Probably the first episode she'd listened to in maybe ever.
Wow.
At least in full. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. What did she think?
She flat out said there was a side of me that she doesn't know. Which I imagine is true for, again,
All
this
of us.
whole project.
Yeah.
Like 140 episodes will probably change your impressions and certainly your deliveries.
That is true. From here, we'll go to, of course, figuring out what we're doing next week. That's John's responsibility. John, where are you taking us, buddy?
Back in 1985, due to a biking accident with a broken wrist and a burgled apartment, two Johns, Linnell and Flansburgh, began recording music on an answering machine and giving out the number so that people could actually hear these songs. True story. They called it Dial a Song. Well, very recently, this duo, who call themselves They Might Be Giants, started doing this again. And from that, they released a new album, Glean. We've already reviewed them in...
That was episode 38, I believe. That was They Might Be Giants Nanobots.
2 years ago. Now we have a new piece by them, with tons of set musicians, extra guys thrown on there, and plenty of trumpet work from what I saw. This is an interesting throwback, something they did 30 years ago and did for almost 20 years as sort of like a freebie for their fans and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, we got a Dial a Song album, so who knows? Might be more of what we already got, might be more new stuff. They Might Be Giants. It's their 17th, 18th album. I already lost track. It should be fun.
It's fun to have John pick this, because I picked it the last time we did it. So if they release another album in like 2 more years and Steve picks it, it'll make the round.
Well, supposedly this
That's
Dial
right.
a
Then
Song...
at that point, it's technically a long-related all pick.
Yeah, that's true.
All
There you
adds
go.
up to us all sacrificing the same amount.
I'm excited for that. I mean, the last album was very eclectic. Danobots, I was very happy with it, so I'm excited to do this.
It's Glean. That's a great title.
It is-
I'm
it is a
excited.
great title.
Well, I gotta say this for They Might Be Giants. They are incredibly prolific, and while we may not get to all of their work, I'm definitely excited to see this project.
Maybe it'll be as good as their gold-earning and I believe award-winning Here Come the 1-2-3's children's album back in about 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay.
Not familiar.
Yeah, but that one's over my
Can't
head, but
say.
sure. As Steve would say, sure.
Sure. Oh, come on. That's a group expression now.
It pretty much is a group expression. Most of our expressions become group expressions, let's be honest.
Sure.
Thanks for listening, guys. As always, you know the spiel. Let's just do our sign-off and go to bed. So remember, everybody, music is life. And life is good.
If you enjoyed this and other album analyses, topics, and guests, please subscribe to the Crash Chords podcast on iTunes, where you can also rate us and review us. For more media, also subscribe to Matt's one-on-one interview series, Crash Chords Autographs. To receive emails on all new content, subscribe at the top of our homepage. Also receive updates by liking us on Facebook, following us on Twitter at Crash Chords Web, our Tumblr, and our YouTube channel. And remember, keep the discussion going, because music is life, and life is good. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them in the comment board below each post. Otherwise, email us directly at admin@crashchords.com.